Why, hello, friends. It's a pleasure to see you again. Have you been well since the last time we were here? We do hope so. We care about each and every one of you so very much. And we're very glad that you come to join us here and listen to the stories. And speaking of stories, how are we liking The Forgotten Door so far, eh? Last time we read chapter 4, a very interesting chapter wherein Mr. Bean laid out all of the facts and tested little John's knife and clip and found that the gems therein were worth quite a lot more than little John seemed to think they were. And in his eagerness to go release Rascal, little John lightened his feet, didn't he, and quite startled the Beans. And what about Mr. Bean's ominous warning that there's trouble ahead? Interesting questions, which we're about to answer. But first, are you ready? Do you have your pipe, or your mug, or your cup, or whatever it is that makes you feel comfortable? If not, go and get them. We'll be right here waiting for you. Do you have them? Excellent. Now then, sit back, relax, put your best listening ears on as we read Chapter 5 of The Forgotten Door. The Forgotten Door by Alexander Key. Illustrated by Dom Lupo. Chapter 5. He remembers something. Sleep did not come easily that night. For a long time, little John lay motionless beside Brooks, thinking of the day while he listened to the sounds beyond the window, the familiar and unfamiliar sounds of a world he didn't belong in. Somehow, by some accident, he had been lost on a planet that was not his own. It had been hard for the Beans to admit that to him, but of course there wasn't any other answer. Only, how did he get here, and why did so many of the wild creatures seem familiar? Thomas had a theory about the wild creatures and life on other planets. As they puzzled over it that afternoon, Thomas had said, "The latest belief among astronomers is that our Earth wasn't made by chance. It's the result of certain exact conditions. There are other suns, just like ours, and the same laws affect them. So there are bound to be other worlds like ours, with life developing on them in almost exactly the same way. If there are people like John on them, then naturally—" "I won't dispute you," said Mary, "but that doesn't solve John's problem." That was when Thomas suggested they get some help. "Oh, good heavens, no!" she exclaimed. "How could anyone really help us? You know how people are. Don't you realize what a mess it would be if officials started buzzing around? Papers would get it, and we'd have reporters and half the world swarming all over the place. Honestly." I guess you're right. Thank Pete some idiot like Angus Macklin didn't find you, John. It was lucky we happened on you when we did." "No, it didn't happen that way, sir. I picked you." He explained to the Beans how he had waited for them. "That settles it," said Thomas. "If you picked us to help you, we're sticking by you. Now here's the crazy thing to consider. Our civilization is pretty advanced, the most advanced on Earth, yet we're just beginning space travel. We're not able to reach distant planets yet, so how did you, whose civilization seems to be behind ours, ever reach us? You must have—" "Thomas," Mary interrupted, "you're starting all wrong. Can't you see how wrong you are?" "But Mary, I'm judging by what I see. John's people haven't progressed beyond barter and the hand loom. They must be tribal, for he knows nothing of money, laws, cities, and government." "Thomas, cities come and go. Governments fall and money becomes worthless. Is there a mill on Earth that can produce anything as wonderful as John's jacket?" "Well, if we had that kind of fiber—" "But we haven't. Can anyone on this Earth learn a language as quickly as he learned ours, and read our thoughts the way he does?" "No." "Can anyone move the way he does?" Thomas shook his head, his lips compressed. "Thomas," she went on, "if all the people on this Earth, everybody, were absolutely honest, Would we need laws and jails and armies and bombs and things? Guess not. Doesn't it seem obvious that John's people are actually far in advance of us? Well, they're certainly mighty intelligent. So intelligent that they could easily have all the expensive and complicated things we have, if they wanted them. But they must not want them. They don't value them. I'm sure they've progressed way beyond them and value other things more. Thomas, how long do you think it would take us to do away with the crime and war? Thomas Bean shook his head. At the rate we're going, we'll need another 1,000,000 years. Then there's our starting point. If John's people are 1,000,000 years ahead of us, they've long known about space travel and they've simplified it. They seem to have simplified everything else. My goodness, Thomas, they could have worked out as something as simple as stepping through a door from one room to another. That sounds a little far-fetched, said Thomas, but maybe I'm 1,000,000 years behind. Does it make any sense to you, John? Something moved in his mind. From one room to another, he repeated. Door. It seems familiar. The idea, I mean. Think, Mary Bean urged. Think hard. It was no use. The thought, whatever it was, remained in hiding. When Brooks and Sally came home from school, he spent the rest of the afternoon helping Brooks in the garden. Already they had begun to accept him as John O'Connor. Lying awake in the night beside Brooks, he searched again for the hidden thought. It seemed important, the most important of all the hidden thoughts, but the harder he searched for it, the farther it seemed to retreat from him. He dozed finally, and long later awoke suddenly. Rascal was barking, warning of wild creatures crossing the pasture. Deer. Instantly, silently, he was out of bed, telling Rascal to be quiet while he drew on his clothes. In another minute he was outside, running with lightened feet to the pasture fence and bounding over it. But the deer had been frightened by Rascal's barking. They had gone back up the forested slope and refused to come down again. Disappointed, Little John paused and automatically glanced upwards. For the first time since his arrival, he saw the wonder of the stars. Here, in the open pasture above the black bowl of the surrounding mountains, they blazed in uncounted millions. Even as he stared at them, one streaked like a flaming jewel across the sky. A shooting star. There had been shooting stars when something happened. Shooting stars and a door. He raced back to the house, excited. It was nearly dawn and the beans were already stirring. As he burst into the living room, he saw Thomas, still in his pajamas, lighting a fire in the fireplace. There was a door. I remember that part. A door, said Thomas, as Mary hastened in from the kitchen. What kind of door? I don't know, but it seems that I was standing somewhere looking at the stars and I fell. And as I fell, I remembered something about a door. Go on, Mary urged. That's all I can remember, as if it were part of a dream. Just stars, and thinking of a door. Could you have been in a ship? Asked Thomas. You might have fallen out of one in some way. No, it wasn't like that. I suddenly fell into something, and when I woke up, I was here on a mountain, and it was morning. Thomas stood snapping his fingers, frowning. Mary, he said finally, it's possible you've hit on the right idea. John, as soon as we finish the chores and had breakfast, we're going hunting. I want to see that spot where you found yourself. After breakfast, Brooks and Sally went down to catch the school bus, and Thomas got a knapsack for Mary to fill with lunch. When it was ready, he thrust an odd-shaped hammer into his belt and started for the truck. Little John looked curiously at the hammer. That tool, it seems familiar. Do you chip rocks with it? It's a rockhound's hammer, John. Thought I'd take it along and examine a few ledges while we're out. Might find a thing or two for the shop. How did you know what it's for? I had the feeling I knew how to use it. Have you another I may take? Why, sure, partner. We'll just go prospecting together. Thomas found a second hammer, and they were returning to the truck when a car with a star on the side turned into the driveway. The car stopped behind them, and a lean, gray-haired man got out. At the sight of him, little John was aware of sudden worry and alarm in Mary Bean, who stood watching from the steps. The man approached, studying them carefully with his hard, observant eyes. His nose was slightly hooked, and he made little John think of a hawk he had seen the day before. A hawk searching for prey. "Mr. Bean," said the man in a grating voice, "I'm Deputy Anderson Bush from the Sheriff's Office." He opened his coat and showed a badge. "Glad to know you, sir," Thomas said easily, extending his hand. "I've seen you around, but this is Mrs. Bean, and my young partner here's John O'Connor. What can we do for you?" "Like to ask a few routine questions, if you don't mind." "Sure, fire away." "Where were you people Saturday?" "In town most of the day." Is anything wrong?" "We'll get to that. I understand you have 2 children. Were they with you?" "Yes." "All the time?" "Well, most of the time, except when they were in the movies. I knew where they were all the time, if that's what you want to know." The deputy wrote something in a notebook, then looked down at little John. "What about this boy?" "He didn't arrive until Saturday evening." "Where was he before that?" "Traveling, on his way here." "His parents bring him?" "No." Thomas lowered his voice and added, "Both Captain O'Connor and his wife were killed recently, and John's been pretty badly upset. Must we?" The deputy finished writing in his notebook before he spoke. "Mr. Bean, I only want to know where the boy was all day Saturday and Sunday. That goes for your boy, too. I believe Brooks is his name." "Yes. You see, this is John's first trip to the mountains. Took him all day to get here. He arrived about supper time. Sunday, he stayed home with Mrs. Bean, and I took my kids to church." "And Sunday afternoon?" "We were all here. No one left the place. What's this about?" Deputy Bush made more entries in his book. Again, he glanced sharply at little John. "Mr. Bean, have you heard anything about a wild boy in this part of the mountains?" Yes, I have," Thomas replied slowly. "Gilby Pitts told me about it, but I'm afraid I don't take much stock in it. Do you?" "Mr. Bean, I don't know what Mr. Pitts saw, but it seems to be very unusual. My job is to check up on it. Have you noticed any strange boy around?" "Well, I certainly haven't seen any boy that looks wild to me," Thomas answered, smiling. "Is he accused of any crime?" Deputy Bush carefully closed his notebook and returned it to his coat pocket. "No one," he said, "is being accused of anything yet. Do you know the location of Dr. Holliday's summer place?" "Of course. Dr. Holliday is an old customer of mine. Gilby Pitts takes care of the place while he's away. What about it?" "Someone broke into it either Saturday or Sunday. Mr. Pitts didn't learn about it until yesterday morning when he went over to finish some work he'd started last week. Some things were stolen." "And you think a boy did it?" "No question of it. There are footprints and other signs. It was a boy about the size of this one, for he squeezed through a narrow window that a larger person couldn't have entered. He may have had a helper. Now, Mr. Bean, don't take any of this personally. I have to check on every boy in the area. Thank you for your help. Good day, sir." "Good day, Mr. Bush." Thomas stood snapping his fingers after the deputy left. "Of all the things to happen," he burst out angrily. "Thomas," Mary began worriedly, "do you think it likely that Anderson Bush could find out the truth about this wild boy thing?" "He certainly could. He's no fool. I've never talked to him before, but I know his reputation. He's a born ferret and a stickler for the law. That's why he'd sure give us trouble. Bush doesn't like kids, and he never makes any exceptions. He sure had me going with those questions. If only he doesn't get too curious about John and start asking more." "There's really no reason for him to," Mary said. "It shouldn't be hard to find out who broke into the Holiday place." "Oh, he'll find out, but that's not what worries me. It's pretty obvious who did it. Only he doesn't know certain people like we do. He hasn't been here long enough. It'll take time to narrow things down and find out who's lying. And they'll lie. Oh, confound that fool Gilby for bringing up that tale." "But he had to, Thomas. After all, where there's been a robbery." "I suppose so. Well, the thing's happened, and there's nothing we can do about it." Thomas sighed and turned back to the truck. "Let's get on with our hunting, John." Well now, wasn't that quite the chapter? It seems that little John's and Mr. Bean's rock-hunting expedition and search for where little John came from was delayed a bit by their run-in with Detective Bush, eh? What do we think of Detective Bush? Seems quite the by-the-book sort of officer, doesn't he? However, there still could be trouble ahead, because even though the beans told white lies to help Little John, lies have a way of coming back to bite you in the end. But that will have to wait for next time. We'd like to thank you for watching and ask that you click like, share, and subscribe. And of course, always remember that you are loved, that you are strong, and that you are not alone. I'm Percival. Thank you for watching.